Hey, good morning. So we'll continue with our general introductory framework, but you'll notice that on the platform, I have put together what is supposed to be a second presentation there for you. So let me speak briefly to that. 5 questions have been put there. Now, I use those questions, which are presentation, as a way of teaching the second topic, which we call the institutional aspects of healthcare. So instead of having a delivery on it, I assign students to go and look at materials and then build presentation on it, and then we'll come and present in class. So there are 5 questions, and my understanding for the time being is that, let's say you are 5, okay? So let's let each, or maybe put yourself in 5 groups. So one group will take question 1, another group 2, 3, 4, 5. So prefect, arrange that quickly as soon as we finish, and put the grouping on the platform, and you know your questions, and you work on them, and then we do for submission Monday, okay? We do for submission on Monday, so let's take note of that. Is that clear, or you're not clear about that?
Yes, my lord.
Okay. All right, so we made the point that this course, we also call it the healthcare law and ethics. So the ethical aspect, let's engage it a little bit more. So we have an ethical issue or moral issue, and question is, what is an ethical issue? So where we encounter conflicting values, beliefs, goals, or responsibilities, when we are concerned that persons or their rights are not being respected, when we are concerned about fairness and justice, when we are not sure what we should do or why we should do it, morally speaking. So all this brings up issues of something being ethical or unethical whenever we are confronted with some of these situations. So if you go into philosophy, right, there's as I recall, like the moral philosophy and then the philosophy of ethics. We defined ethics and morality, if you like, this way. So ethics comes from the Greek word ethos. Ethos means custom, practice. So if somebody say that it's against the ethos of our society, just trying to say that it's against the custom or the practice or how we do things. So ethics then is the discipline about moral or philosophy on moral, if you like. And then if you take a morality to etymologically, you go back into Latin, we have the word mos. Mos means character or nature. So moral, that is like the system of norms or rules, written or not, about human behavior. So ethics then is a philosophy about moral problems. It deals with the art of living, whether something is good or bad, something is right or wrong, and so on. And of course, Aristotle is often associated with being the father of ethics, and his famous work, the Nicomachean Ethics, those who've done philosophy before. So then we could say that ethics is the formal study of what is wrong and what is right, or the study of the basis or principle for deciding right and wrong. In other words, when you are embarking upon a course of action, you're embarking on a particular thing, and you need to find out whether what you are seeking to do is right or wrong. Then you are engaged in an activity or exercise that we call the ethics. So the analysis of the processes by which we decide what is right, by which we decide what is wrong. So in a clinical setting, you need to make a decision to do particular procedure, not to do particular procedure, and so on and so forth. Would that be right? Would that be wrong? And all that. So how do you justify the rightness, or how do you expose the wrongness of that intended action? So all those things are an exercise in ethics. Yeah, so if you look at the UNESCO Bioethics Dictionary, it defines these matters as follows. So it will say that ethics is a system of moral principles or standards governing conduct, a system of principles by which human beings and proposals may be judged, good or bad, right or wrong. A set of rules or a standard governing the conduct of a particular class of human action or profession, any set of moral principles or values recognized by a particular religion, belief, or philosophy, the principles of right conduct of an individual. So if you look at all these permutations, the bottom line is that ethics provide us a way of trying to judge whether something is right or something is wrong. So that is what ethics is. And for that matter, ethics is not merely obeying the law. If you just obey the law, that does not mean that it's necessarily like you're doing work in ethics, or it's not just a question of compliance. Of course, in most instances, you notice that what the law is stated to be tend to coincide with ethical position. So therefore, when you are obeying the law, you would also be acting ethically. But that is just a question of coincidence. It's not the case that is how it should always be. It's just coincidence that what is stated as the legal position is happily coinciding with what we may judge to be right or wrong. In which case, your obedience of the law will mean that you are also acting ethically. So we also have the relationship between the moral and other regulatory norms. Of course, for moral norm, we are talking about specific individual system of personal values with validity of genesis, development, and adoption. So we all have like a values, okay? So there are certain things you think is good or you think are bad. So those are your system of personal values. And we are saying that the origins of those values you have, that is, they have some way of being validated. So maybe most of us, we subscribe to one religion or another. So maybe you are a Christian. So in terms of values of personal values, it will definitely be what the Christianity has decreed as good or bad. And oftentimes, you go to the Bible principles, the commandments, the Decalogue, love of neighbor, love of God, and things like that. And then if you're a Muslim, you believe the Holy Quran, and your system of values will coincide with what the Quran and the Hadith of the prophets teaches. And then if you don't belong to any of these religion, I mean, you still have like a culture, and within a cultural system or so, there will be some values, what is good, and then what is bad, and so on. Good. So we, of course, you go even into like the primitive society, okay? Primitive society, that is sociologically those societies which are not sophisticated in terms of the kind of civilization that we have. Over there too, they also have some form of regulating themselves. So there are some regulatory norms over there. And to some extent, they also serve equivalent role of what we are talking about. So we have customs, maybe like you go to our villages, for example, like my hometown, Kuntanase. On Tuesday, I remember growing up, we're not supposed to go to farm on Tuesday. And I'm sure you go to some other communities or towns, they also have their own other things. And those who live by the seaside, there are days that you're not supposed to go fishing. So these are all custom, but they serve some form of also regulating behavior. Certain things you can do and you cannot do, and so on. Of course, we've talked about religion. Yeah, so religious norms are often characterized by the concept, if you like, sanctity. You know, like that is sanctity as in the holiness, and moral. You know, we use the term something being good or something being bad. But the difference between this and religious norms is that religious norms are more absolute. When we say they are absolute, that is to say that they are prescriptive, they are dogmatic, they are not negotiable. For example, the Christian Bible or Christianity tells you that love God, love your neighbor, okay? That is, and the Lord Jesus said that is the summary of the whole law, okay? Now, that teaching is absolute in the sense that you cannot qualify it, or you cannot introduce conditions, right? And when the religious norm is broken, it is said that you've committed a sin, isn't it? If you don't live according to religious system, you say that you have sinned. But where a moral norm is violated, the person feels that he has committed mistake against his dignity. You would not probably use the language of sin, but that, you know, some people say that, oh no, it's against my principles, meaning that he wants to live by a certain standard of dignity. And where he has acted in a way which falls short of that, then he sees himself as, you know, not having lived up to that standard of dignity. But he wouldn't say that I have sinned. But for religious norm, anytime you don't make the mark, it is a sin you see yourself as having not committed and falling short of the mark which God expects of you, and so on. So ethics is further classified. We have meta-ethics. Meta-ethics, that is as the field of ethics concerned with the nature of right or good, nature and justification of what? Ethical issues. So that is meta-ethics. Then we also have normative ethics. Normative ethics as from standards or principles. Then we also have applied ethics, that is the actual application of ethical principles to particular situations. When you are trying to directly see how ethical principle apply or does not apply to situations, then you are doing applied ethics. Sorry, I think some people are making noise at the background, so that they're doing exercise or whatever. Sorry. So in ethics, the support or the reasons we assign emanate from moral values, principles, and theories. So for example, let's look at these statements. I think we should do X because A and B are really important values. So what you are saying we should do is the X. And your reason for saying we should do X is because there are certain values which you think the doing of S will help you to do what? To realize or to achieve or to uphold. Then you also have why wouldn't be appropriate because it violates principles A and B. Now let's look at the third rendition. S will be the right thing to do because of our obligation to do A. Okay? So all these ways of using ethics, you see how they play out in the doctor-patient relationship and also in the clinical setting, as it were. So let's keep some of these things at the back of our mind. Now, in terms of, just a minute. Yeah, so we have three broad types of ethical theory, or if you like, the approaches to ethics. We alluded to this last time we had a class, and we said that we have the consequentialist theories, and consequentialist theories are concerned mainly with ethical consequences of particular actions. Then we also talk about non-consequentialist theories, which is concerned with the intention of the person making ethical decisions about a particular action. So it's not so much about the expected outcome, but the mindset with which the person is embarking upon that course of action. Then we also have what we call the agent-centered theories, which is concerned with the overall ethical status of individuals, as it were. We'll say a few more words about each of them in the course of this delivery. So, consequentialist theories, we may consequential theories, we may talk about utilitarianism, also known as a utilitarian approach. We mentioned the utilitarianism yesterday, and the egoistic approach, and then the common good approach. So by the utilitarian approach, we usually attribute it to scholars like Epicurus. Epicurus was a Greek philosopher, and he advances the viewpoint that the best life is one that produces the least pain and distress. And that is why we say that for utilitarianism, they talk about the greatest happiness or maximum happiness for the greatest number of people and so on. So if you are judging whether something is right or wrong for Epicurus, that would mean that is the particular thing you're doing, is it going to minimize pain significantly and advance happiness? Another contributor to the utilitarian approach is Jeremy Bentham, which you've met earlier on in your jurisprudence or legal philosophy. So according to Bentham, actions could be described as good or bad, depending upon the amount and degree of pleasure and or pain they will produce. So there's something he developed called the philosophic calculus. So the philosophic calculus, for example, is a scheme for trying to work out the extent of happiness, the extent of pain or discomfort associated with the various causes of action and so on. Then we also have another scholar called John Stuart Mill, J.S. Mill. He also developed the utilitarian approach further and modify it by introducing what we call the subjective concept of happiness, as opposed to the more materialistic idea of pleasure. Because if you look at Epicurus and Jeremy Bentham, the way they explain happiness as emanating from maybe what you intend to do or avoid is more of the, if you like, the pleasure aspect, the material pleasure aspect. But J.S. Mill will say that it's not so much about pleasure, which can be objectively be determined, but it may also depend upon the viewpoint, the subjective mind of the particular person who is going to engage in the action or refrain from that. And that will let you know whether there's happiness in it or vice versa. We also
please,
have...
I want to ask a question.
What is your name?
No, please, I wanted to find out. My name is Emmanuel Kenneth Odru.
All right.
I wanted to find out the extent of pleasure. How do we measure it? Are we measuring it on their theories? Were they measured on regards the beginning of the activity, the anticipation into the activity, or the aftermath?
Oh, and then is the outcome. So the outcome. So when the activity is done or the action is pursued, will that result in happiness? So is the after. It's after, but of course, there are times that if you apply this to, let's say, a medical field, then it is very easy for us to appreciate that it is the ultimate outcome, the aftermath, which is important. But then if you apply it to some other life situations, then you will notice that sometimes the process of the activity, if it produces happiness or otherwise, may not be very easy to decouple from what the aftermath is. Yeah, so that one is true. but we are interested in how it will apply in the medical field. So we don't have difficulty in appreciating that it is what the aftermath, what is the outcome is, which is really important. Then we also have the egoistic approach, which is a little bit of a modification of the utilitarianism. And we call that the ethical egoism, or the ego has to do with self, right? Ego. It has to do with self. So the ethics of self-interest. An individual often uses utilitarian calculation to produce the greatest amount of good for him or herself. And in fact, if you look at human beings, right, and that is why we often say that self-preservation is the first law of nature, isn't it? Now, part of it is egoistic approach, or ethical egoism, that human beings are all selfish. It is uncomfortable to make such assertion, but that is the truth. All human beings are selfish. All human beings are selfish. And selfish in the sense that they are looking after their self-interest. And for that matter, in every situation, the individual will try to find out the greatest advantage, the greatest benefit to himself or herself. And that is what will enable him or her to make a decision as whether what he or she is doing is something worthwhile, and so on. So therein lies the lack of selflessness, right? And that is why those of you who remember your philosophy of law, Professor Hart, in his famous work, The Concept of Law, will try and make concession that there should be some element of morality in law because of the condition of human vulnerability. And what are those? You talk about limited altruism. Altruism means selflessness, which is an opposite of self-interest or selfishness, right? And he makes a point that if you look at human beings, we are not selfless. We are rather selfish. We are rather self-interest oriented, looking out for what is in our interests. And for that matter, there should be a way to try and moderate that. And in fact, if you look at Christianity, which I am familiar with, so that's what I would say, that the point about Christianity essentially is to transform this selfishness of human being, right, into selflessness. So a sacrifice means that you are doing something which will not bring any benefit for you. You are just doing it for the good of the other. You are just doing it for the good of society, and so on. So that is the selflessness. And so if you take the ethical egoism, the emphasis is on the ethics of self-interest. And we have scholars like Thrasymachus, right? Thrasymachus, who was a student of Socrates, as well as a social contrarian, Thomas Hobbes and Ayn Rand. They all made a contribution towards what we call the egoistic approach to ethics. That is a consequentialist theory. Then we also have the common good approach. The common good approach, Plato and his student Aristotle promoted this perspective that our actions should contribute to ethical communal life. In other words, as whether something you're doing is good or bad, ethical or unethical. We should ask, is it contributing to ethical communal life? Is it for the common good? And later on, you come across scholars like Thomas Aquinas who talk about the summum bonum. Summum bonum, that is a common good. Then we also have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he also made the point that the best society should be guided by the general will of the people, which should then produce what is best for the people as a whole. So the general will here is like the common good. Then we also have non-consequentialist theories. So if you look at all the various variants of consequentialist theories we're looking at, you notice that the emphasis is on the outcome of a particular action or activity, as it were. And that is why some will say, okay, well, the outcome means that it's going to advance my self-interest. That is the egoistic approach. Or is it going to advance the good of the entire society? And so on. Now, we have non-consequentialists, where the emphasis is not about the outcome, but some other consideration. The intention of the one who is doing the act. So we have like the duty-based approach, the rights-based approach, fairness or justice approach, and then the divine command approach. So the duty-based approach, which we alluded to as our last class, you talk about the deontological ethics, and deontological ethics is associated with Immanuel Kant, that German philosopher. I'm sure those of you who have done the philosophy of law, you've also come across Immanuel Kant. Now, Kant, by deontology, or his explanation of deontological ethics, would argue that it essentially encapsulates doing what is right is not about the consequences of our action, but about having the proper intention in performing the action. So what you're doing is right is not so much dependent upon what it is producing, no, but the intention, the mindset with which you are doing it. That is what will determine whether it is right or it is wrong. So the rightness of any activity, the rightness of any action is judged by the intention with which it is performed. Of course, I don't want to sound religious here, but if you look at Immanuel Kant's way of putting it, that is very much how God deals with human beings in Christian religion. So for Christian religion, is not what you have done or doing which is important. Your motivation, the mindset, the intention, the heart with which you are doing it, which will be important. Of course, that is just a footnote remark. So how does Immanuel Kant develops this idea that we judge the action not by its consequence, but by the proper intention with which it was done? So he proposed a formula for discovering our ethical duty. And that formula is called the categorical imperative. So by this categorical imperative, Immanuel Kant meant that acts only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that or at the same time will that it should become universal law. In other words, according to Kant, as to whether what you are doing is good or bad is ultimately dependent upon this. If, for example, the particular thing you're doing. If you had all the power, right, in society or in the world, to let everybody follow what you're doing because you are so convinced that that thing you're doing is the right thing, then you are acting ethically. In other words, what ethical duty entails is the categorical imperative. And do you see the particular precept, the particular principle, which you think you have to follow? Are you convinced that it is so essential, it is so fundamental, it is so absolute that if you had all the power in you to let every human being follow it, you actually do that because of your conviction of its fundamental or its absolute nature? Then, if you get to that situation, you have discovered your ethical duty. And that is why he called it the categorical imperative. And that is to say that act only according to the maxim by which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we're talking about the sanctity of life in medical or healthcare law. So let's say that preserving life, protecting life, not destroying life, right? Not killing life. If you are convinced that that is a good thing, and that if you had the power in the world to ensure that everyone will act in a way which protects life, which preserves life, then preservation of life, or what you call the sanctity of life, it is an ethical duty. Then another aspect of the non-consequentialist approach is what you call the fairness or justice approach. That is which we see typically. If you go to you've heard of the Hammurabi Code, one of the very ancient ethical codes in ancient Mesopotamia. And there was a statement there that all free men should be treated alike, just as all slaves should be treated alike. That is to say that, and be fair, right? Be fair. Be fair towards everyone. So it's really against discrimination. So if people are in the same situation, they should be treated alike. That is the point. And later to that, many years later, many centuries later, John Ross would come and add that just like maybe how Kantian was reasoning that just ethical principles are those that to be chosen by free and rational people in an initial situation of equality. If you remember John Ross' approach to justice, John Ross makes the point that if you want to know very fair and just principles which should be adopted to govern society in any situation, let us go by it this way. Let us assume that we have all be blindfolded, okay? And we don't have any idea where we are going to live in society. And so in the state of our blindfoldedness and we not knowing where our situation will be in the society, we just want to agree upon principles which should govern society. Now, John Ross makes the point that because you do not know where your real situation will be in that society, you are not going to be influenced by your maybe just you are any bias just because you want to be here or you want to be there, because you don't know. There's an equal chance for you to be anywhere in the society. So therefore, if you are trying to work out principles which should govern us, you are likely to bring out the most fairer set of principles, knowing very well that you could be anywhere in society, and because you could be anywhere in society, you would like to bring out the best so that wherever you are, you will be well off and you will not be worse off. So just like, let's say in Ghana, before we adopted our constitution, we try to assume that we don't know who will be the next president, we don't know who will be an MP, we don't know who will be a chief justice, who will be this, who will be that. So we want to work out the principles which should govern our society. So we are not really going to think that, oh, because I am going to be like the next president, then let us organize the constitution in such a way that it will favor me or something like that. You don't know where you'll be. And because of that, you are able to contribute ideas which should ultimately ensure fairness and justice for everybody. That is what John Ross was trying to say. Then we also have the divine command. Yes.
Doc, please, with the principle of fairness,
yes,
I'm looking at it with regards to the medical field, where every diagnosis for a patient on this with the same condition will be the same. So in the event where probably a patient is being rushed to the theater for maybe a femoral fracture, I think that the treatment would be the same, or the surgical procedure would be the same. So would that surmount to the fairness and justice approach when it comes to
okay.
it?
All right, thank you. Yeah, you know how medicine is. Of course, we have what we call like the standard operating protocols, or SOPs and so on. So that for certain conditions, this is how it is recommended that you go about it. If the particular situation that you have falls within that, then that be it. But don't forget that we have now moved more towards what we call the evidence-based medicine. So where you need to do a bit more diagnostic investigation to become sure as to what is really wrong with this particular patient. Now, if you've done all that, and let's say that we have 3 patients who have been diagnosed the same conditions and all that, then fairness will require that you treat them alike. However, there may also be other competing ethical issues because of resources constraints. Let's say that you have a limited resource, limited drugs or whatever you're going to use for the procedure, and it will not suffice for all the 3. So how, and these 3 have the same conditions from your diagnosis. So who are you going to prefer over who? So you still need another ethical framework, another ethical approach to help you to work out the situation. So sometimes you have a situation in which you may apply more than one ethical principle to the situation. But as we move on, we see some of these things. Yeah, so divine command, as we know, that trying to follow the will of God, and that is another way. We also have what they call the virtue, agent-centered theories of ethics, the virtue approach, the feminist approach. So the virtue approach simply argues that ethical action should be consistent with ideal human virtues. And we again go to Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, and where the point will be made that ethics should be concerned with the whole of a person's life, not with the individual discrete actions a person may perform in any given situation. In other words, virtue approach is looking for coherence, is looking for consistency. So like the whole of your life, there should be that kind of coherence, that kind of consistency, and not just what you do on a particular occasion or situation. And if you go to the Asia, especially where those who subscribe to Confucianism, that is the Confucius, he actually encourages some of this approach that you have to act virtuously in an appropriate manner in all areas of your life. We also have the feminist approach. Of course, feminism, and they emphasize the importance of the experiences of women and other marginalized groups to ethical deliberation. And for them, they talk about the principle of care as a legitimately primary ethical concern, which is standing in sharp contrast to the cold and impersonal justice approach. So it's not just what is just or fair, but they think that care is very important in trying to determine whether a particular course of action is right or is wrong. But feminism and how it works, and where every situation in life, they want to argue that the patriarchy, that is a male-dominated view, has actually consigned women's experiences to the background, and we need to bring that to the center and see how things will have to be adjusted. These things are just for your information, so we don't need to waste a lot of time on them. So we also have the applied ethics, and let's get familiar with some words or lexicon which are used in making ethical judgment. So maybe if we say that something is obligatory, that is, it is not only right to do it, but that it is wrong not to do it, right? So in ethics, if we are saying that something is obligatory, that is to say that it's not just right to do it, but if you don't also do it, you are committing a wrong. So you have an ethical obligation to perform the action. Or when we say something is impermissible, it is wrong to do it and right not to do it. So that is, and right not to do it. So that is impermissible. Or permissible, or ethically neutral. That is neither right nor wrong to do. So maybe like in law, we see that there's some kind of discretion, isn't it? So discretion will probably coincide with what is being called permissible in ethics. We also have the supererogatory types of actions are seen as going above and beyond the call of duty. So they are right to do, but it's not wrong not to do them. So where you go extra mile, right? Let me give you the example, like, the rest in law of tort, we have what they call like the rescue cases, right? The rescue cases, that is, you see that someone is drowning or someone is burning. It's not your duty to actually go and rescue the person from getting drowned or being burned by the fire. But if you did that, you've done something more than what is required of you, so that is great. But if you don't do it, you've not committed any wrong, as it were. We also have various types of ethics. We have the professional ethics. That is the obligation of the profession. So you take healthcare professionals. we take doctors, we take pharmacists, you take the clinical psychologists, you take phlebotomists, and the allied health professionals, the various types of professionals within that category. We take lawyers and all that. All these are profession, and the profession has got its own obligation. But the profession would like to police members of the profession so that the profession will be preserved and society will see the profession as living up to its standards. So they will often do what we call the professional ethics is actually about self-regulation. So if you go to what you call the Hippocratic oath, which you mentioned, Hippocratic oaths will talk about a whole lot of things which doctors are supposed to do or not supposed to do. These have been developed into various professional medical ethics documents by various associations. So a Ghana Medical Association, that is, they have their own way of self-regulating, as it were. And the pharmacists, the same thing, and so on and so forth. Then they, as a part of professional ethics, is also to provide the education, right, of members of the profession and others. What about medical ethics? Yes, medical ethics, if you look at the literature, and there is this argument that it started as part of professional self-regulation. That is to say that those in the field of medicine wanted to ensure that those who were within the medical profession would engage in right conduct so that the nobility and then the respect which the profession is supposed to command in society will preserve. And that is why, if you look at some of the old medical malpractice cases, you come across, and if you look at the legislation, right, the Health Professionals Act, especially the section relating to the Medical and Dental Council, you will notice that they have a particular professional wrong they call the infamous conduct, right? The infamous conduct is supposed to be an action which brings, if you like, the medical profession into disrepute, which lowers the dignity of the profession. So medical ethics in that regard was being done by the profession, not necessarily for the good of society, but more for the good of what? Of the profession. So to be later on that those who are outside the profession will get interested in trying to evaluate the ethical actions of those who are within the profession. And so therefore, it's not just for the dignity of the profession, but to ensure that the profession is also working in the interest of what? Of society, as it were. So we have the human aspect of medical ethics, and of course, we also have the animal aspect, veterinarian aspect of medical ethics, and often discussed as part of what you call the veterinary jurisprudence. Those who do animal law, and then those who are doing the veterinary medicine, they learn more about that. Yeah, so as we indicated, medical ethics is certainly a good illustration of what they call it, applied ethics, because we try to study moral values and judgments and see how they apply to medicine. And for that matter, medical ethics encapsulate so many other areas which are relevant to practical application in clinical settings. So areas like history, philosophy, theology, sociology, anthropology, but indirectly they are all important when you're dealing with medical ethics, as you will notice. Well, in terms of history, if you want to know the historical path which this area of knowledge has followed, you can go back into the ancient of ancient, as it were. So if you look at the third dynasty, about 2,700 years before Christ, and then the Babylonian, where we have the Code of Hammurabi and all that. I mean, just for you to have the picture that medical ethics is as old as human society. But in a more, if you like, the recent times, you notice that there have been attempts for a more focused statement of medical ethics to be done. And if you go to US, for example, they have the American Code of Medical Ethics, but in the UK, there was what we call like the Percival Code. The Percival Code was some of the, one of the first attempts to try and put down some of the, if you like, the do's and don'ts in relation to the medical profession, going back to the early 19th century. But the most important, I sent a particular book called the Medical Law and Medical Ethics, a Symbiotic and Relationship by Jose Mueller. Now, if you look at that book, he tries to trace the history, right? The history of medical ethics. And the most important aspect, in my view, is how revelation after the Second World War actually fueled or served as a catalyst for a more aggressive development of medical ethics. Because if you look at the Second World War, you notice that Germany, that is the Nazi regime, actually they weaponized, to use American language, weaponized medical knowledge and scientific experiment, so that instead of medicine helping to preserve and make human life better, it was rather being used to destroy human life as part of Adolf Hitler's war strategy. So during the Nuremberg trial, which was set up after the Second World War, a lot of atrocities were exposed to have been indulged in, and that resulted in a blueprint or a formal statement of certain actions which are never accepted as right when it comes to medical experiment, when it comes to medicine. So that is what we call like the Nuremberg Code of 1947. And later on, the World Medical Association would also make various declaration of ethical standards. So we have the Declaration of Geneva, various period, 1948, 68, 84, 94, 2004, 2006. And now we have the World Medical Association International Code of Medical Ethics, and so many other documents which have attempted to document what will be accepted as right or what will not be accepted as right as far as medical knowledge is concerned. So the question is, why should we study medical ethics? Is it not enough that the medical doctor or the healthcare professional is knowledgeable and is a skillful clinician? Must he actually study ethics? Is it important? If you go to the medical school and all that, we are told that they have a lot to learn. So should we saddle them with medical ethics as well? I think these are questions you can answer just for yourself. But of course, for us as students of the law, we are interested in medical law, but as I indicated to you, medical law cannot be decoupled completely from medical ethics. And that is why we need to be familiar with how medical ethics develop and how they operate as well. So no doubt, medical ethics is an integral part of medicine. If for nothing at all, we've cited the Hippocratic Oath, which was developed by Hippocrates in the ancient Greece, and he introduced the concept of medicine as even being a profession. And if you look at the more recent times, there have been various developments as far as the human rights thinking is concerned, and maybe things like torture, forced migration, depriving people to access to healthcare. All these things have been framed as what as human rights, and they are certainly relevant when we are talking about medical ethics. And again, I have also made the point that there's that close connection between medical ethics and law, particularly when it comes to medical licensing, right? And regulatory officials. If you need to license someone as a healthcare professional, in addition to the various knowledge, competencies, which the person must demonstrate, having gone through medical school and all that, you may also need to find out his appreciation of ethical aspects of the profession and so on. But the point to note is that law set even the bar lower, and ethics prescribe higher standards. Okay, so there are times that physicians or healthcare professionals may disobey the law that demand unethical behavior. That is to say that there are times that your sense of what the ethics of medicine, ethics of the profession call for, may even be higher than what the law is saying. And a true professional may want to remain very loyal to the ethics of the profession. And that will mean that you're doing something which is over and above even what the law requires. Now, related to medical ethics is what we also call the bioethics, right? Also known as biomedical ethics. Well, they are similar, but not necessarily the same. Medical ethics focus primarily on issues arising out of the practice of medicine, okay? So issues from doctor-patient relationship, issues from clinical settings and all that. And then bioethics is quite broad. It is concerned with moral issues raised by development in biological sciences, genetic engineering, right? Cloning and all those things. A whole lot of things are happening in the biological sciences, and the ethics of all that is what is studied under bioethics. So bioethics does not require the acceptance of certain traditional values that are fundamental to medical ethics. No. So if you want to break bioethics down, we can go back to its Greek etymology. So bio in Greek means life, and then ethikos, that is moral. So the science of art that aims at identification, analysis, and resolution of the ethical issues in almost any field that is related to human life and health. We call that bioethics. So let us keep that in mind. If we look at the literature, I think that terminology became really fashionable in the 70s. But before that, it was not that used. So bioethics is also a branch of applied ethics and studies the philosophical, social, and legal issues arising in medicine and then the life sciences. So it's mainly concerned with human life and well-being. Of course, there are times that ethical questions relating to non-human biological environment may also come up. And especially now that we are faced with climate change, okay? Climate change and also sustainable development. The ecosystem, how do you sustain it and all that? All these have implications. Yeah, so as I said, bioethics became relevant in the 70s. So you look at the material, because of time, I'll be skipping some of the explanation. So some of the questions answered by bioethics is deciding what we should do, what decisions are morally right or acceptable, explaining why we should do it, how do we justify our decision in moral terms, and describing how we should do it, the method or manner of our response when we act on our decision. So these are some of the questions which are explored by bioethics. Yeah, so we've talked about the clinical or medical ethics, and we have noted that it is a practical discipline that provides a structured approach to assist physicians in identifying, analyzing, and resolving ethical issues in clinical medicine. And if you are to practice good clinical medicine, there is a need for you to have knowledge about ethical issues such as informed consent, truth-telling, confidentiality, end-of-life care, pain relief, and patient rights. All these will present scenarios or situations in which you will need to resolve various ethical dilemmas. Yeah, so as a practical ethics, medical ethics will focus on the process of deciding what is the most appropriate right course of action. So look at the course of actions I'll be talking about, have this spelled. The most appropriate right course of action in a particular situation. So given these facts, given my abilities and skills, operating with finite knowledge in real time, and then effecting that course of action. So what is the right course of action to embark upon? So that is what practically medical ethics focuses on as it were. And of course, ethical problems are caused by the fact of having to choose between goods or things to which we owe an obligation. You may make a mistake in how you rank them. You may prioritize some over others, and that is problematic. And sometimes we also fail to grasp the relevant facts as a result of ignorance or incompetence or willful blindness. That is, we are deliberate in trying to grasp the relevant facts. Or we may do bad factual analysis. And this may be as a result of either our own personal or institutional distortion, as the case may be. And then we also have organizational problems. Sometimes you are working in a facility, right? A hospital and so on. So we have its own problems over there. And the general organizational culture, how, for example, you are working in a place and if people are not punctual, right? They don't come to work early and so on. Or then you are just an individual. Sometimes, let's say that somebody's lateness may affect a procedure that you are supposed to do. Currently, there is a case which KNUST Hospital is grappling with. I don't know if you know about it, this circumcision case. Are you familiar? Are you familiar with that?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. I thought it was in the news that somebody went for circumcision and then the person, 10-year-old baby died or something like that. And they've decided to sue the university and all that. Anyway, it's still ongoing. So at some point, I may give you the facts to look at when we've discussed medical negligence. Yeah, so sometimes there may be some procedures we want to do, but it may involve a lot of money. So high transactional costs for doing the right thing. There are some doctors, instead of letting so many investigations be done, laboratory investigation and all that, they may consider that unnecessary. Or just like last night, my wife took one of our daughters to the hospital and later on went there. So just a 5-6-year-old girl, she was complaining about the tummy. So they did the ultrasound, and later on, my wife didn't agree as to the necessity of that procedure, since there were some other simple ways they could have confirmed what was wrong with the child patient and all that. So here I'm just saying that just for the sake of the high transaction cost for doing the right thing. So sometimes you are in a facility and you know that to do proper treatment, proper diagnosis, a whole lot of things may have to be done, but it may also be very expensive, and you may want to just ignore it and its implication for proper ethical behavior. Yeah, so what is the process of making ethical decisions? So one, awareness. We need to be aware that there is a moral issue or ethical issue at stake. We should have that awareness that, yes, there's a need to decide, to make ethical decisions. So we should recognize the moral or the ethical challenge. So what is its nature? How important? What are the facts? What are the issues? What rules or values apply here? Is it about autonomy? Is it about sanctity of life? Is it about truth-telling? Is it about non-maleficence? And so on and so forth. Is it about justice? To whom or what do I owe a duty? How should they be applied? Who needs to decide and act? Who ought to? To what am I obligated because of the role of the position? What are the consequences? What are the options? So in terms of duties, to whom do you owe the duty and what? Duties may be owed to individuals, that is like patients, families or guardians, police, co-workers, and self. So the ethical issues may sometimes be towards individuals in any of these, or it may be to groups. You belong to a profession. So the ethical issue may relate to obligation you owe to the profession. Then we also have society. You owe obligation to society generally, and the vulnerable, the weak. The ideas or principles which may be implicated, maybe what you are doing is against the law, or is against truth telling, or you are not advancing justice, maybe some individual value. And in terms of their duties, they emanate from various sources: legal obligations, institutional obligation, professional norms, and obligations. So as individuals, how do we decide what is ethical? Well, two different ways. We have the non-rational approach and then the rational approach. So the non-rational approach, for example, include obedience. That is, you have to follow rules or instructions of those in authority, whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them. So typically, you take children. Children are, and those who work under authorities are supposed to obey instructions which are given by their parents or by their superiors, as it were. It's not a question of whether they agree or they don't agree. Or sometimes, if you have like a role model, imitation. And sometimes, so subjective approach may come in. You are feeling, I feel, or I desire that this is the right, or my intuition. Some will say that no, my gut feeling was that this is not a good thing, or this will happen, and so on. So location in the man. And sometimes so a habit, maybe it's something you have been confronting or has been coming up over and over again. And because of that, you have become used to resolving it, that you even deal with it without even thinking about it, because you become so used to it. Then we also have the rational approach in trying to decide whether something is ethical or not. So we've talked about them, the deontology. You try to search for well-founded rules. And remember Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative that if you are acting by the maxim, by which you will, that if you had all the authority, you have lied to universalize a particular thing as the norm or standard for everyone. And you also have consequentialism. It's part of the rational approach, that the right action is the one that produces the best outcome, what you call the determinism, and which uses the concept of utility as a measure. So the greatest good for the greatest number of principle, greatest number of people. Then we also have what is now popularly known as a principalism. And principalism here, referring to the ethical precept, which the authors of principles of biomedicine know. These are what do you call the Beaumont, Oxford and Beaumont, the ideas they put together. So they identified autonomy, they identified avoiding harm, what you call the non-maleficence, and then they also identified doing good, what you call beneficence, and they also identify what you call like the truth telling, telling the truth, and so on. So they are known as a principalism. And oftentimes in a situation, there may be a clash between one or two or three of those principles. Then we also have a virtue ethics, of course, virtues like compassion, honesty, prudence, dedication, and all that. So these are some of the rational approaches which may be used in actually resolving an ethical situation. So in practice, this is how you work out you come to ethical decision. So the steps are: one, problem identification. So identify the technical facts, the moral parameters, legal constraints, and then the relevant human values. Two, you develop alternative courses of action. It's not case, it's just a typo, courses of action. So identify the relevant ethical principles for each alternative. Recognize ethical assumptions for each alternative, and then determine additional emerging ethical problems. Then three, select one alternative course of action and justify the selection of your alternative and defend your selection upon ethical grounds. And four, consider objections to the alternative selected. So objections arising from maybe factual error, faulty reasoning, or conflicting values. So these are some of the ways in which we make ethical decision, and is applicable also to clinical setting as it were. Yeah, so I have elaborated on this. You can look at it in the material, but because of time, we would actually have to be running. It's already 8:13. So let's come close to healthcare, how the factors we make use of in making ethical decision in healthcare. We have the ethical theories, the principles, and then the rules. So in terms of, I've mentioned the principalism, the ethical maxim, that is the principles. So general guidelines that state what is forbidden, desirable, or permissible. So they're often the base for rules. And I mentioned Beecham and Childress in their work, Principles of Biomedical Ethics. They pointed out the principles of ethics as respecting autonomy, doing no harm, that is a no maleficence, benefiting others, that's the beneficence, and being just, that is justice. Of course, these have been added on to, like telling the truth and all that have been added onto. Well, in terms of rules, we also have manners which are developed by professional organization, as we have seen already, and some are regulative. Maybe you get like either the Medical and Dental Council of Ghana, or Pharmacy Council, Nurse and Midwife Council, and so on. And they are also protective, right, for the public opinion. And sometimes they may just be for the good of the profession itself. I mentioned the infamous conduct. Yeah, so I would like you to look at the examples. I have some group work I want to look at. I usually have one on medical ethics, but because of time, I will just let you do the one I have given you already, so that we can move on to discuss doctor-patient relationship and also discuss medical malpractice and medical negligence at our next class, because we are behind time. Okay, so I will draw the curtain down here on this particular topic, and we are going to start another topic unless you are tired. Otherwise, I want us to do another topic before you go. Shall we go ahead?
Okay, let's go ahead.